This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everyone's having a good one out there today. Plenty to get to on today's show. As usual, going to get Chip Scoggins, Star Tribune columnist, on in a little bit to talk Timberwolves. Had an interesting piece on Karl-Anthony Towns, on Anthony Edwards, on how they performed or didn't perform in Tuesday's win over the Clippers and what's needed from both of them and more starting Saturday in that playoff series against Memphis. So good conversation with Chip, a lot of good insights there, good back and forth, so I hope you enjoy that conversation. Going to talk a little bit about a player leaving the Gophers hockey team and a player that could be coming into the Gophers men's basketball team here in the not too distant future. And got to talk about the WNBA. I've been meaning to talk about this for a couple days. The draft was earlier this week. Just the inequities in roster size, in team, number of teams in the league compared between the WNBA and the NBA, and how that impacts players coming into this league in an unfair way. But first, what did I miss? Got to talk Twins and the big story Wednesday. Twins playing the Dodgers at Target Field. Clayton Kershaw for the Dodgers, one of the all-time greats, at least a generational great left-handed pitcher for the Dodgers. Has had some injuries lately, has not been as effective, lately in recent seasons. But 7 perfect innings in Wednesday's game against the Twins. It was an afternoon game. It was chilly outside, not a nice day. It was like 38 degrees. Just one of those days where you're kind of hoping to get the game in more or less because these Dodgers don't come back here at all this season. So starts pitching, and it's pretty clear he's got good stuff, right? He starts racking up, inning after inning, strikeout after strikeout. Gets to be 7 innings, 21 up, 21 down, perfect through 7 innings, 13 strikeouts. He's sitting right at 80 pitches, and everyone's like, okay, he's got a chance at history. He's got a chance to throw the first perfect game of his career. One of, I think there's been 22 in Major League Baseball history, history that goes way, way back, more than 100 years of pitching history. There's only been 22 of those in history. And so you're thinking, okay, what's going to happen here? Because in the era of modern baseball, sometimes 80 pitches, especially this early in the year, is kind of the point at which a pitcher will exit a game. But sometimes when someone's having a special game going like this, and a perfect game, you don't get much more special than a perfect game. You wonder, will they stretch it a little bit more? What's the limit here? Will they send him back out for the 8th and then potentially for the 9th? Now, a generation ago, this would not have been a question, right? Or probably wouldn't have been a question with most teams. 2 generations ago, certainly would not have been a question. Before pitch counts really became in vogue, before, 6 innings became the new 8 innings, before 7 innings became the new 9 innings, before 5 became an acceptable start from a starter and not a badge of dishonor after a rough start or a poor start. This wouldn't have happened. Pitchers routinely threw 110, 120. Back in the day, 150 pitches sometimes just because they threw 9 innings a lot. So this is a generational question more than it is anything. As we've learned more about pitchers, more about arm strength, arm trouble, as pitchers have started to make more money, as players in general started to make more money, the investment is bigger. You don't want to risk an injury. So with that as a backdrop, that was the question facing Dodgers manager Dave Roberts going into the 8th inning, and he made the decision in conjunction with Clayton Kershaw to take him out of the game. And there was naturally and unsurprisingly a lot of chatter on both sides of the decision. Some people saying, yes, absolutely, the right thing to do. It's a cold day. It's his first, early in the year, first start of the season. There was a abbreviated spring training. He hadn't really begun his off-season program until a few months ago. Things like that where you worry about, a guy who's older, has had injuries. It's a lot of factors in play. Preserve him. If your biggest goal is winning the World Series, not having this individual glory in one game, this is the smart thing to do. And then you get the old school pitchers, players saying, oh my gosh, you can't take a guy out. He's only had 80 pitches. Like, what is going on here? I'm losing my mind. I'm freaking out. This is baseball in 2022. So I get both perspectives, and I think the thing that both sides could agree on is that it's unfortunate, right? Everybody would like to see Clayton Kershaw get a chance to pitch a perfect game, right? In a perfect world, if there were no other external factors, if he was perfectly healthy, if this was, if he was 31 years old, and if this was 2000, 4 or 5 years ago, however long ago, if it was July and it was a nice day and he was, had thrown 100, 110 pitches in previous starts, yeah, go for it. But all the other factors, do weigh into this decision. But everybody can agree, you'd rather see Clayton Kershaw have a chance to go for history without any other circumstances. But, I don't know if I have a right or wrong in this, because I definitely do see both sides. I'm disappointed for baseball fans that didn't get to see a chance to have this completed. And then obviously Gary Sanchez broke up the perfect game, and he kind of combined perfect game right away in the eighth inning after Kershaw was lifted. So there was that. And Kershaw himself seemed to echo, some of those struggles of decision making, even though he agreed with the decision. He's saying those are selfish goals. We're trying to win. That's really what we're all here for. I would have loved to have stayed, but bigger things, man, bigger things. And he had told Dave Roberts his preference was an 85 pitch limit. He got to 80. There's no way. No way you could finish the game. If there was one more inning, maybe you squeeze it out, given those parameters. But two more, perhaps too much to ask. It would have been harder to even to pull him if he'd gone through the eighth perfect. And then what do you do? So I guess, if you're thinking about the big picture, it's the right thing to do. But, it also shows how we're conditioned to think about baseball these days, right? That 80 pitches can be a place where, yeah, you're like, oh, yeah, yep, I understand why they took him out. Like 80 pitches, if they had set a limit, if this is early in the year, that's just what they do. So I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just it's the modern game. It's where we are with baseball right now. It's unfortunate that he didn't get a chance to finish this game. But I guess in the long run, I think people will be talking less about this in a week than they would if Clayton Kershaw was injured. Dodgers fans saying, well, Sandy Koufax, think about how great Sandy Koufax was. He threw a perfect game. He used to throw all these innings, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Sandy Koufax also had to retire at age 30 at the height of his career because he had such severe elbow pain that he could not pitch anymore. His final season in 1966, he threw 323 innings. He made 41 starts. He won the Cy Young Award. He struck out 317 batters, but he could not physically do it anymore, perhaps because of the wear and tear that he had endured that year and the season prior. So there is a limit to people's bodies. We know more about that these days. And I guess the final takeaway from this is I think it was the smart, right thing to do, even if it wasn't the fun thing to do. Speaking of not fun, on the Twins side of things, it was a miserable day. They lose for the second straight time to the Dodgers. They're 2-4 now overall. Miguel Sano does not have a hit this year. You could string together a lot of no-hitters with a game against just Miguel Sano. 0 for 19 this season. Also learned on the day that Alex Kirilloff went on the disabled list. Now, the injured list, we're calling it these days, because of the recurrence of his wrist problems. So that's not good. Twins hitting, it's been up and down, kind of spotty this season. They've had some outbursts, some home runs, but by and large, the offense has not been there for them. And if they're looking for reinforcements in the minor leagues, check this out. The Saints, AAA Saints on Wednesday, got 0 hits. Yeah, it was a combined no-hitter, of course. Indianapolis no-hit the Saints at CHS Field. But so between the Twins and the Saints, 18 innings, 1 hit, no runs. So that was your top two Twins affiliates, the Major League Club and the AAA Club on Wednesday. Maybe they need a little bit of warm-up. I don't know. I don't think anybody likes to hit in this cold weather. Although the Dodgers went back-to-back-to-back home runs in the 8th inning, so maybe there's a little bit having to do with the pitching as well. So we'll see how this all shakes out for the Twins and their offense, but Wednesday was about as bad as it can get.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Glad to have Chip Scoggins, Star Tribune columnist, back on Daily Delivery as we Going to day 2 of Timberwolves Mania. There's going to be a lot of Wolves talk on the podcast in the coming days, just because that's the team right now that's playing the most meaningful games. I'm sure we'll do plenty of Wild talk in a couple weeks once those playoffs start. But right now, the Wolves are the story, Chip, and that game Tuesday had so many angles to it. One of which you wrote about for Thursday's paper. That's on StarTribune.com as well. Just kind of talking about Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, and just one game, but Anthony Edwards has 30 points in what I would call his postseason debut. That's my distinction for the play-in round. The postseason. It's not the playoffs, but it's not the season. It's the postseason. 30 points in his postseason debut, helping to rescue Karl-Anthony Towns, who had another bad postseason game. If we can go back to his history, that one series against the Rockets wasn't great either. As you think about it, Chip, how do you kind of balance all the good you saw from Anthony Edwards and all the good you saw from D'Angelo Russell, balanced against, kind of the struggles that Towns had in that game as we think about the playoffs going forward?
Well, I think we obviously will talk about and focus more on the good because they won. Had they not won, this would have been a tough day for Karl Towns. Nationally, locally, he would be under a lot of criticism and heat. But let's start with Edwards. And watching that game in that building, which was electric, probably for the first time. I guess I don't know that I covered the playoff series a couple years ago with Jimmy Butler, but I go back to 2004 and when KG was here, and just the energy and noise level and excitement that was in that building last night. And for all intents and purposes, to me, that felt like, we were talking about this before we went on, a win or else game, because not saying you're going to beat Memphis, but I don't think anybody wants to play Phoenix.
No.
And so it felt like a game 7 where, not an elimination game, but as close to it as you could get because of the path that you would take, win or lose. And for Anthony Edwards to play the way he did down the stretch, the dunk, the step back 3-pointer with 45 seconds left, he has the ball in his hands, not Russell's, not anyone in his hands, makes 2 free throws to extend it to 106 to 101. And I woke up this morning. I didn't sleep a lot because my head was spinning, and it was just the craziness after that. But Mike, he's 20 years old.
He's 20. Yeah, he's can't even have a celebratory Bud Light like a
tall boy,
like Pat Bev did on the podium.
I have that line in my column that
nice.
He's 20.
Yeah,
and the thing that I admire about Edwards is, obviously he's great skill, but just his demeanor and fearlessness and the desire to have the ball in his hands, regardless of the situation. And as I wrote in my column, I don't think that's going to change because I don't think the stage or the moment's ever going to be too big for him. And guess what? There are going to be moments where he misses shots and he fails, but I don't think that's going to deter him from wanting to have the ball in his hands again the next game. And I just think that's a unique quality that the superstars have. And he just seems oblivious to. He's smiling and attacking and a ruthless competitor, and just plays with this joy that, you sit here and think, and you don't want to trek too far, but it's like, imagine 3 years down the road when he's been through a lot of these situations and he has more experience. I just woke up this morning and I was like, this guy is 20 years old and playing this way. And at the moment of truth, they put the ball in his hands and he carried that team in a way. D'Lo made great. He was masterful too. But to me, those plays down the stretch that Edwards made were just exhilarating.
Yeah, and he didn't. You're right. I think the thing that stood out to me, in addition to the making of the plays, the 30 points, the timeliness of when he was able to find his offense, it was from the very beginning. It did not look like he was overmatched by the moment. It was he scored their first 7 points of the game. He didn't look like he was forcing anything, or I got to get mine, or I've got to prove myself on this stage. He kind of let it come to him to a certain degree until they needed him to take it upon himself. When Towns fouled out with 7.5 minutes left in an abysmal game for Towns, we'll get to get to him a little bit more here in a while. Edwards was absolutely ready for that, and to be 20. And we've probably talked about that for a while. Like Towns probably needs someone like that. I don't know if he's the alpha in that situation. And Edwards, and like you said, Russell to a degree too. Edwards feels like the alpha in that situation.
Well, he does. And the thing I liked about him, it was he got it from 3-point. He got it attacking. He had that quick start. And then in the second quarter, when Russell kind of took the lead role, it wasn't like Ant said, well, he kind of let that play out and let Russell kind of carry it. And then in the fourth quarter when they needed him. And the other thing is he had a beautiful block that was called a foul. That wasn't a foul.
Yes.
I thought his defense was terrific. He stood in there and was physical and feisty on defense and disruptive. And so, if we're going to call that a playoff game, which it felt like, and for all intents and purposes, it was. Man, you talk about just a guy who was not gun shy at all by the stage. He played like he always plays, just kind of with that attack mentality and that, as he said afterwards, they were scared to guard me, so I was going to take advantage of that. It's like, don't you love hearing like the 20-year-old second-year guy saying they were scared to guard me, so I'm going to go at him? Just the bravado that he has is unique.
It does stand, unfortunately, in contrast to the game Towns had. Like we said, he finished with 11 points in 24 minutes, fouled out with 7+ minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It looked like they were sunk at that point. They're down 7 in that moment, and they'd been fine without him during the game up to that point. I think they had kind of weathered some storms. So you're like, well, this is the fourth quarter. This is a guy that's, you got to have contribute. And instead that they do pull it out. And you're right. The narrative would have been completely different, but the narrative is going to get revisited as we get closer to the start of that Memphis series on Saturday, because even though we don't have a huge body of work of Karl-Anthony Towns in the playoffs, his first series against Houston was not good. I'm just going to take you back on a little journey. His playoff debut against Houston in that 2018 season, they only lost by 3 to the Rockets in game 1. Towns had 8 points in that game, shot 3 of 9. Game 2, 5 points, shot 2 of 9. He got a little better as the series went along, but not so much so that you look at it and say, okay, this is a guy who has delivered in the biggest moments. He's not yet, and that's not to say he won't, but that's got to be a little bit of a concern for them, that he's put up a few of these clunkers, and especially in that game the other day, in these big moments.
Well, the thing that's disappointing from a perspective of watching is they knew going in, they talked about the game plan. He's going to get doubled. They're going to try to bump him, be physical with him, because he doesn't react well to that. And 2, they know that's going to disrupt him, and he's going to start complaining to the officials. And he just gets so outside of himself and starts worrying about the wrong things. And he gets so caught up with complaining about the contact and to the officials, and he's not getting these calls. And like his 6th foul, he definitely went over the guy's back. He ran right through him trying to get the offense. And then he turned and said it was incredulous that they called a foul. It's like, he's too good a player and too skilled to let that sideshow disrupt him so far off his game. And so he has to get that under control and managing it, because it's self-defeatist at this point. It's just, the constant complaining to the officials. He's not getting the desired result that he's looking for. And it completely threw him out of sorts in that game. He just never was right. He was forcing things. He was all out of, he was rushing shots. And it was a miserable performance. And we talked about going into that thing that so much, because this is the Wolves' first time and they're having these big expectations. And we've seen them kind of live on the edge with Pat Bev and Towns, that composure is going to be a big thing. And so now you're going into a series, and you think Memphis is not paying attention to this stuff, and that they're going to try to get him off his game and get him complaining to officials. So he has to show more composure and just worry about his game and doing the things that he does so well and so skillfully, so he can be better and not worry about all these other things.
Yeah, I mean you're right, and I think he's done a somewhat better job of that in stretches this season. Controlling his emotions a little bit better, not letting that bother him as much as he has in the past. But it's still it's still a thing where he's got that he's got that thing where you're right. It's just kind of like a flip gets switched and he can't get out of this little whatever like negative feedback loop he's in, and then he just makes him go at it even harder, which is when he commits those silly fouls, and they cannot have that against Memphis. Now, again, this Memphis series, let's spin forward a little bit to that because it's an interesting matchup only in that for whatever reason, the Wolves played Memphis very well this year. Memphis was a very good team this season, but the Wolves split with Memphis, and the two losses were pretty close. It was a 7-point loss, an 8-point loss. They won by 5, and they won by 43 early in the year, just kind of an outlier game. If there's good news for the Wolves, Towns was pretty good in all of those games. He shouldn't, have the same type of problem like he had against the Clippers. That was a tough matchup for him most of the year anyway. But, to me, I don't think what Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell did in the play-in game is necessarily replicable. I don't think you can expect them to go out and score 59 points again combined and make all those three-pointers. They're going to have to get more from Towns. So as you think about that, is that with, how does he draw that out of himself, or how do they kind of find that balance where they're getting enough from those three to balance it out and make that a series?
Yeah, I do think because this is probably a better matchup for Towns than what the Clippers, based on what we've seen in the matchups. I have to think if he doesn't respond well to that last night, I mean, if you're not going to see his best performance Saturday in a game one after – I have to, I know he's excited that they're moving on, but I think probably personally, there's probably some disappointment on his part by the way he played and reacted to those situations. So I'm sure he's going to make amends and be better. It's not like Memphis has a ton of playoff experience either. So it's not like you're facing Chris Paul, who's, a team that with a guy like that who's has been through this. They obviously, John Morant's a star, and they got a lot of players and depth and can beat you different ways. For the Wolves, really, it comes down to those big three and, having whatever mixture or combination of it, those three being your best three, but also more than anything, defense. Look at the way they played defense last night.
Yeah.
And it's been a little bit of a roller coaster for them where they've been just terrible at times, but then good at times. We saw it last night. When they're committed to it, it can be pretty good. And so you have to be able to do that consecutively, game after game. You can't have this one where you just have a lull and allow a team just to go crazy on you. So it comes down to, the defense and composure, and then your big three. It can't just be two. You're not going to get A+ performances probably from all three in one game, but it can't be two of the three.
Yeah, and it's, this may seem strange. I mean, matchups being what they are, the postseason is different than the regular season. I really think this is going to be a series. I think it's going to go 6 games at least. I just feel like they've got something now after winning this Clippers game. This might even be, before this game, it felt like this was, something that was going to be a detriment to them, that they could lose this game, that they could end up playing Phoenix or just miss the playoffs entirely if they lost to, if they lost that second play-in game and just got bounced entirely. But now that they've won this game and got a little bit of a taste of what that's like, that might end up benefiting them a little bit in the long run.
Well, and I do think this. I think being at Target Center in the environment we saw last night, it's going to be the same way in the playoffs, if not better. It was loud. It was intimidating. Pat Beverly gets them going with his antics. Antics. Edwards undeniably feeds off that energy. And, if he has one of those games like last night or even more where he gets on a roll, I'll be stunned if this is not a series. I'm not saying they're going to win it, but I think it's going to be a long series just because I think there is a toughness that Beverly and Edwards brings to this group. And if you can get Russell making shots and playing, I don't know if he's going to score at the level he did last night, but he was really good and he was clutch. if he can give you some of that, this team is. I'm sure they scare you, because they have some shooters, and then Edwards can just go off, and the toughness that they bring. They're not just going to roll over and let you walk right over them. I mean, Pat Beverly's going to he's going to push back and get under your skin and create all kinds of havoc out there. So I think it's going to be a fabulous series. I really do.
I do too. I'm looking forward to it. Chip Scoggins, appreciate you joining the podcast. As always, go read Chip's column and all the subsequent coverage we have of this playoff series. There'll be more on Daily Delivery later this week and into the weekend, I am sure, as well.
All right, brother. Thanks.
Always good talking with Chip Scoggins, and we'll have more Wolves Grizzlies talk on Friday's show. Drew Hill covers the Memphis Grizzlies for the Daily Memphium. He will be on this show on Friday to talk about that series, talk about what has made Memphis, like the Timberwolves, one of the most surprising teams in the league this season. Should be a great series, and I hope you enjoy that conversation on Friday as well. Let's move on to the WNBA, and something that's been bothering me for a few days now, and maybe even beyond that. Lynx traded their two best picks, the number 8, number 13 in this year's draft, for 2 future picks next season. That doesn't bother me so much, right? That's just good roster management. They've got a lot of veterans this year. The way they're built this year, it's probably better to reload for a future draft. What does bother me is this. They still had 2 more picks, number 22 and number 28. They used those on Kayla Jones and Hannah Shervin. And Cheryl Reeve, after the draft, essentially was talking about how those players, if everybody else on the roster is healthy, probably won't get much of a chance this season, if at all. And that's not a Lynx problem, right? The Lynx have built a roster, a veteran roster, trying to load up, especially knowing that this is Sylvia Fowles' final season. They've constructed a team in a way that they think is best for them. That's fine. What is troublesome is that a league doesn't have a spot, perhaps, for the number 22 and number 28 picks. And there'll be players who are picked even before that who probably won't find their way onto rosters in the WNBA. That's because there are not enough jobs available in the WNBA. Think about this. There are 12 teams in the WNBA. There's a maximum of 12 players on a roster. Lynx will probably have fewer than that, as Cheryl Reeve will say here in a minute. The Lynx head coach and general manager. So simple math, 12 times 12, 144 roster spots total available in the WNBA. NBA teams, there's 30 of them. You can have a roster of 15 plus some more, but let's just say 15 to avoid kind of confusion with G League, 2A players, stuff like that. 30 times 15 is 450. There are more than 3 times as many players in the NBA than the WNBA, even though there are a similar number of Division I college basketball teams, even though there are 36 WNBA players chosen in every draft and 60 NBA players. So there's more than half the number of WNBA players drafted compared to NBA players, but less than a third of available roster spots. That does not add up. This league needs to expand. They need to expand rosters, and they need to expand the number of teams in order to make this a more equitable situation in this league, because it cannot be a good thing for a player coming out of college to know there just aren't enough roster spots for all the talented women's basketball players out there. So hopefully at some point soon, the league can expand both in roster size and team size to make this more equitable. But until then, it is going to be a struggle for draft picks to make the team unless they are the truly elite of the elite. Cheryl Reeve addressed that, like I said, after the draft. Here is what she had to say about the roster construction and what they're looking at right now.
We'll be in replacement player territory. So we're trying to have a lot of knowledge around if we don't have our full complement of players that we planned for, that are under contract, players that we signed in free agency, we'll be ready in the event that those things happen. We're not going to be able to have the depth that you would like to have. As I sit here and watch the Wolves practice today, and I see, players on both courts and, multiple players, and I'm going, okay, that's going to be like, we're going to be 1/3 of that, our practices. So it just is what it is. And, until our league can, expand and have better opportunities for the teams, then it is what it is from a challenge standpoint. And so we'll do the best that we can to manage it. It's going to be on our minds, but roster, adding to the roster is not going to be one of our options once we hit May 5th and we're practicing, getting ready for that first game. We're going to have 10 players.
And again, not blaming the Lynx, not blaming Reeve. This is just a function of where the league is at, but it is unfortunate and it needs to change. Let's finish with the cooler. A couple things coming and a going in Minnesota sports. Ben Myers leaving the Gophers, not surprisingly, one of the top coveted college hockey free agents, signs with the rival Minnesota Wild rival Colorado Avalanche. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. But good for Ben Myers. Great season for the Gophers, and all the best to him as he continues his hockey career now in the NHL. Could be coming in Dawson Garcia, former Prior Lake standout in the transfer portal. He's played 2 seasons in college, 2 for 2 different schools already, Marquette and North Carolina. So he might need a waiver if he's going to play here. But he sounds like he wants to come back home. He's in the portal. He entered the portal on Wednesday. He was a McDonald's All-American. You guys, this would be a big get for Ben Johnson if he can bring him in and get him eligible right away. So pay attention to that as it goes on, not just if they can get him, which sounds like it's pretty likely, but also whether he can play immediately with some extenuating circumstances with his family. Read more about that in the Star Tribune. Marcus Fuller had a good story on that, and that is online right now. Thank you so much for joining me here today. That is it for me. Like I said, Drew Hill from the Daily Memphian will be on Friday's show to talk more about the Wolves versus Memphis series. Sure, we'll have plenty of other talk on that show as well. Also, be recording a new Access Vikings sometime, I believe, today, so look for that as well. Ben Gessling and I will break down a lot of the new Vikings news and the draft right around the corner, so listen to that as well. Thanks for joining me here today on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We'll see you again on Friday.